The sun poured softly through the wide windows of the sitting room, warming the polished wood floor, casting golden streaks across the furniture. Yet the room felt cold, utterly and irrevocably cold. Not from the temperature, but from the space that now yawned between Elon Musk and his mother. He stood near the fireplace, his shoulders rigid, arms crossed tight over his chest. His voice broke the silence like a glass falling to the floor. "Why didn't you ever tell me I was adopted?" Mae Musk looked smaller than she had ever appeared. Seated on the antique sofa, she kept her hands neatly folded in her lap, her fingers clasped like someone in prayer. Her chin dipped slightly as she inhaled, "Because you were always my son." That was never in question. Elon took a step closer, not angry, not yet, but trembling on the edge of something he couldn't name. But it was a secret, a buried truth. The silence stretched long and tight, like fabric being pulled apart. Mae's eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with something older, heavier. She turned her gaze to the floor, as though the answer might be written in the grain of the wood. "I made a promise," she whispered, "to your biological mother. I told her I'd raise you with love and honesty. But at the time, I thought protecting you was the same as telling the truth." Elon exhaled through his nose and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, familiar yet foreign. "Casa Aurora, that's where it started?" he asked, his voice quieter now, like a man reading his own obituary. Mae looked up, her eyes glistening. She nodded slowly. "It's where I found you. Or maybe it's where you found me." He turned around fully, his expression unreadable. "Tell me everything." 3 months earlier, Mae stood before the wrought iron gate of a modest, aging building in the outskirts of Pretoria. The sign above the entrance read Casa Aurora, the letters chipped with time. There was ivy crawling up one side of the stone facade and a quiet stillness in the air, the kind of silence that arrives only after too many goodbyes. She hadn't been here in over 40 years. In her hand was a letter, handwritten, carefully folded. The signature still haunted her, Irene Bennett, the woman who had once placed a child in her arms and changed her life forever. "We're running out of time," the letter had read. "Funds are gone. We'll be forced to close. The children, there's nowhere left for them to go." Mae didn't know why the letter hit her like it did. Perhaps it was the handwriting, or the scent of paper older than her memory. Or maybe, deep down, she knew this place was part of a truth she had locked away too tightly. She pushed open the gate and stepped inside. Irene Bennett was older now. Her silver hair was pinned back neatly, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for Mae's. "You came," she said, her voice cracked and soft. "I had to," Mae replied. "This place, it's where I became a mother." They sat in the sunlit office, its walls covered in children's drawings and faded photographs. Irene poured tea with careful hands. "We're at the end," she said. "I've exhausted every resource. Donations have dried up. The city can't keep us open." Mae's eyes moved to the window, where a group of children played under a jacaranda tree. The purple blossoms fell around them, like confetti from another world. "How many are here now?" she asked. 18, Irene replied. "All under 10, and all with nowhere else to go." That night, Mae sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the letter again. Not the one from Irene. Another one, old and yellowed, written by a woman she never got to meet. "His name is Elon. Please give him a chance to change the world." She had never shown that letter to her son. She had carried it hidden through every milestone of his life. His first steps, his first heartbreak, his first rocket launch. She remembered the promise she made, to raise him with love. But now, as the orphanage that had given him life teetered on the brink of closure, she realized love sometimes meant telling the whole truth. She picked up her phone and called her son. Back in the present, Elon sat down slowly, his elbows resting on his knees. "You called me. You told me a children's home needed help. You didn't say it was my home." Mae nodded. "I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd pull away. I thought if you saw what the place was, maybe your heart would remember before your mind did." Elon looked at her, eyes softening. "It's funny," he said quietly. "When I first read the financial documents, I noticed the name Musk on a very old donor line. Then I found my birth certificate, tucked in the back of the orphanage archive. Your name wasn't on it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was." May's hands trembled. "I never wanted you to feel that. You were always mine, Elon. Always." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, faded, edges worn, showing a baby wrapped in a blue blanket with the initials CA stitched in the corner. "Casa Aurora," he said softly. There were tears in his eyes now. "But you're right about one thing," he continued. "That place, something in me did remember. The first time I stepped through those gates, I felt it. Not a memory, a presence. Like the walls remembered me, even if I didn't remember them." May wiped her eyes. "So what now?" she asked. He looked at her, the faintest smile returning. "Now I save it, not just with money, but with everything I've got. Because if I came from there, maybe there are others who'll change the world too. They just need a chance." And in that moment, the silence between them broke, not with more words, but with understanding. Dear viewer, if this story is moving you even a little, take a moment to let us know. You don't have to say much, just a heart emoji, a memory, or a word that came to mind. We read and respond everything with care. And if you want more stories like this, true stories about love, loss, and the quiet miracles that shape our lives, consider subscribing to our channel. The street was quiet, too quiet, lined with jacaranda trees whose purple blossoms had begun to dry and fall. The road leading to Casa Aurora wound its way through a forgotten part of Pretoria. The outer walls of the orphanage were tall but tired, flaking white paint, moss-covered corners, and an iron gate that creaked like an old man remembering his youth. May paused before entering. She hadn't been back in over 40 years. Not since that day. She wasn't even sure why she'd come now, except that the letter had refused to leave her heart. As she stepped through the modest entrance gate, the air changed. It smelled of old wood, boiled rice, disinfectant, and something far more intangible, something like memory. A woman with silver hair and a posture sculpted by years of quiet resilience stepped forward from behind the reception desk. Her face lit up with weary warmth. "May, you came," said Irene Bennett, her voice cracked but steady. May nodded, setting her purse down slowly. "I didn't know I would," she admitted, "but I couldn't ignore your letter. It was like something inside me refused to let go." Irene's lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. "That's because Casa Aurora never really lets go. It holds on, in places we forget to check." Without another word, Irene gestured down the corridor. The two women walked slowly, May's heels echoing softly on the worn concrete floors. The interior of Casa Aurora hadn't changed much. The paint had faded into pastel memory. The once colorful murals were chipped, water-stained in places. A soft trickle of laughter echoed from a nearby room. As they passed an open door, two children darted past them in a flash of noise and motion, one clutching a torn teddy bear, the other laughing wildly with a whistle between her teeth. They didn't stop. They didn't have to. Love still lived here. That was clear. "It's falling apart," Irene said gently, opening a creaky door that led into her office. "But it's still alive." May followed her in. The room was cramped, warm, and full of clutter: papers, old toys, dusty trophies, and photographs. Stacks of folders occupied nearly every flat surface. Irene walked over to an armoire and opened it wide. Inside were columns of aging binders and loose envelopes. She picked one at random and handed it to May. Water bills. Overdue. Donations suspended. A formal warning from a local court. A letter from a lawyer with the word closure underlined. May sat heavily on a wooden chair near the window. She sifted through the documents slowly, her face growing more somber with each page. "I've tried everything," Irene whispered, sitting across from her. "Grants, appeals, community outreach. I even rented out the old garden space. But the roof leaks, The staff is down to 3 people, and now the government says we're unfit. If we can't prove financial stability in the next 90 days, they'll shut us down. The children will be scattered. May felt her heart contract. These weren't just papers. These were lives. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun, now slanting in through the narrow window. And if I asked my son, she asked quietly, more to herself than to Irene, if I reached out to Elon? Irene didn't answer right away. Her face softened into something almost maternal. The world knows your son, May. He's a man of vision, of progress, of planets and stars. She paused. But does he remember where it all began? That question hung in the air longer than May liked. They stood eventually and began walking back toward the exit. But just before the front hallway, May stopped. Her eyes had caught something on the wall, a photograph, small and square, mounted in a tarnished silver frame. It showed a baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket, being cradled by a young nurse with curly hair. The child's eyes were dark and intense, wide in a way that didn't belong to a baby. Not fearful, not expectant, just present, like he knew more than he should. May leaned in. There was no name, just the year, 1971. Irene followed her gaze. That one, that was taken the day before you came. The word sent a ripple through May's chest. You don't mean? Irene didn't have to confirm it. The weight in her eyes said everything. May turned back toward the photograph. Her throat felt tight, her chest full of something she couldn't name, couldn't tame. That child, that lost, watchful child. She had held him, named him, loved him, and yet she had never told him the truth. Back at the hotel, the room was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't rest, it gnaws. May sat at the small desk by the window, the folder from Casa Aurora open before her. A few loose bills sat atop it, her reading glasses folded beside. But her gaze wasn't on the paper. She was holding that photograph. She had asked Irene for a copy, and now she couldn't let go of it. There was something strange about seeing that moment frozen in time, knowing what would come after, knowing the story that photo didn't capture. She traced her fingers along the edge, the curve of the nurse's arm, the soft fuzz of the baby's hair. She could almost hear him breathe, could almost hear the cry he made when she first touched his hand. And then the dam broke. May Musk, woman of elegance, of strength, of steel and fire, folded her arms over the desk and cried. Not with shame, not with regret alone, but with the overwhelming ache of unfinished truth. She had tried to do the right thing, tried to love him without burden. But maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't a burden at all. It was the missing piece of who he was. The sun had long set when she finally lay down, the photo tucked gently under her pillow. She didn't sleep. Not really. She just lay there in the dark, listening to the pulse of the city outside and the deeper rhythm of her own heart. Tomorrow, she would call him. And this time, she wouldn't leave anything out. The early evening sun bled orange against the horizon as May sat across from her son in the soft quiet of his home office in Texas. The room, usually a haven of cutting-edge models, framed patents, and glowing monitors, now held a different kind of weight. It wasn't about numbers or propulsion or the distant red soil of Mars. It was something closer, something urgent, something human. Elon, she began gently, her voice steady but her hands clenched in her lap. I need to ask you for something personal. He turned from the screen, where equations danced like restless spirits. Okay, he said, sensing the unusual gravity in her tone. There's a place in Pretoria, an orphanage. It's called Casa Aurora. I visited it a few months ago. The roof leaks, donations have dried up, and the government's planning to shut it down. Her voice cracked slightly. I saw the children. I saw their eyes. Elon blinked slowly, not indifferent but caught off guard. You want me to help save an orphanage? Ido, I know it's a lot to ask, but I don't know. Something about it won't let me go. He nodded once then again, as though aligning his internal compass. Send me everything. I'll have someone from a foundation review the numbers and stabilize whatever's needed. May placed a hand briefly on his arm. Thank you. 2 days later, Elon received a digital folder with dozens of scanned documents. Most of it was expected: financial spreadsheets, maintenance reports, even hand-drawn thank you letters from children. But one file, unassuming in its title, stood out. Dossier I.R. Musk, 1971 intact. He froze. For a full 10 seconds, he didn't move. The document opened on his screen with a quiet click. Inside, there was a scanned ledger entry from June 1971. Name: Elon Reeve Musk. Age: 5 days. Date of arrival: June 30th, 1971. Guardian: Eva, no last name provided. Status: temporary placement. Awaiting permanent solution. Elon's breath caught in his throat. He scrolled further. Attached were handwritten notes by the then director of Casa Aurora. The child had been healthy, quiet, prone to long periods of silence, and an unusual intensity of gaze for a newborn. The mother, Eva, had been distraught but determined, refusing to give any details about herself. She had simply left the baby, signed the necessary forms, and disappeared. The next pages showed that on August 24, 1971, a private adoption was finalized. The name May Musk appeared, along with the notation, Private International Adoption. Discretion requested by adoptive parent. He stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so fast it rolled against the wall. For the next 2 hours, Elon didn't speak to anyone. He pored over every inch of that folder. He searched for corroboration, dates, timelines, photographs. And then, near the bottom of the file, he found it, a scanned black and white image of a baby in a white wrap being held by a woman in a nurse's uniform. The infant's face was unmistakable. It was him. That expression, wide-eyed, alert, quiet. The sharp curve of the ears, the angle of the nose. Even the curl of hair at the crown. A strange chill settled in his bones, the kind that doesn't come from cold, but from the collapse of certainty. He had always known himself as May's child, raised in South Africa, molded by ambition, curiosity, and discipline. But now, that foundation tilted beneath his feet. Adopted, and never told. Elon didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he quietly commissioned a deeper investigation. He needed facts, not speculation. The report came within 48 hours. The findings were consistent. Elon Reeve Musk had indeed been entered into the Casa Aurora registry in 1971. The woman named Eva had vanished. No fingerprints on file. No last name. No follow-up visits. Nothing. It was as if his biological mother had entered the world only briefly, just long enough to deliver him, and then vanish like fog in morning sun. May had taken custody under the seal of privacy, allowed at the time through a clause for cross-border adoptions. She had flown in alone. No agency, no cameras, no fanfare. Just one woman choosing to become a mother. He closed the report and sat in silence. His life had been shaped by precision, invention, and audacity. But this was a crack he hadn't anticipated. And it wasn't the fact that he had been adopted. It was that the truth had lived in a locked drawer, gathering dust, while he built rockets and reimagined futures. That night, he didn't sleep. He walked the perimeter of his property under the wide Texas sky, letting the wind pass through him like a ghost. And yet, despite the emotional storm, he kept returning to one thing: the orphanage. Casa Aurora. The name, once benign, now pulsed with gravity. It wasn't just a charity case anymore. It was the beginning of his story. A place that had held him, however briefly, when no one else did. There was something haunting and sacred about that. He opened his laptop and made a decision. He would still help the orphanage, but not through proxies. Not as a distant donor. He would be involved personally, intimately. He called his project manager at the Musk Foundation. I want a full team on this. Get me architects, education consultants, and legal advisors. Start with stabilization, then expansion. I want those kids to have a future. The manager hesitated. May I ask why this one matters so much? Elon paused, then said simply, because it matters to me. He didn't explain. Some truths were still too raw to unwrap. But as he stared once more at the face of the infant in the photo, his own face, before language, before ambition, before identity, he realized something unexpected. He didn't feel lost. He felt found. Not by someone else, but by the echo of himself, quiet, waiting, tucked into the history of a place called Casa Aurora. A place that was dying. A place he now couldn't allow to disappear. Because somehow, in the ruin of that forgotten building, his story was still unfolding. The sun hung low above Pretoria, casting long, sleepy shadows across the worn facade of Casa Aurora. Elon stepped out of the black sedan, his feet meeting the dusty ground with a hesitance he wasn't used to. This was his second visit in person, though in the time since May had first brought the orphanage to his attention, he had already changed its course forever. His foundation had sent resources swiftly. Fresh paint for the walls, new mattresses, a stock pantry with real food instead of powder remnants. There were now working fans in the bedrooms, and a patch of the playground no longer collapsed in rust and termites. Even the smell of the place had changed, from mildew and desperation to something faintly sweet, like cinnamon and sunlight. Still, when Elon entered the main hall, it wasn't the improved conditions or the children's cautious smiles that caught his attention. It was a boy, a solitary figure, small and still, sat beneath a high window streaked with years of dust. The child's back was straight, hands resting gently on his knees. His eyes were closed, not in sleep, but in quiet focus. The rest of the children buzzed around the room, drawing, playing, some sneaking glances at the man they recognized from screens and whispers. But this boy remained in his own still orbit, unmoved. Elon gestured to Irene Bennett, who had come to greet him with her usual grace and slightly crooked smile. "Who is he?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Irene followed his gaze and sighed, not with sadness, but something closer to reverence. "That's Isaac," she said. "He's 9, born blind. But if you ask me, he sees more than most." Elon raised an eyebrow. The boy's face was turned slightly upward, as if catching a sound that no one else could hear. "May I speak to him?" "Of course." As Elon approached, his footsteps softened instinctively, though Isaac seemed to know he was coming long before he arrived. "Hello," Elon said, crouching beside him. Isaac turned his face slightly, and a smile spread slowly across his lips. "You're the man with the machines," he said simply. Elon blinked. "I am. How did you know that?" Isaac chuckled, a soft musical sound. "Because your silence makes noise. Like a rocket holding its breath before it rises." For a moment, Elon forgot where he was. The hallway, the orphanage, the months of confusion and truth unraveling, none of it mattered in that instant. "That's quite a way to describe someone," he said. "It's just what I felt," Isaac replied. "You think in lines and sparks, don't you? Like a machine trying to learn how to feel." The words landed like a whisper and a thunderclap all at once. From that moment on, Elon found himself returning to Isaac each day of his visit. He didn't plan it. It wasn't in the itinerary. But after long meetings with architects, budget committees, and government inspectors, he would wander back to that hallway under the window where Isaac always sat, waiting as though the air itself had told him Elon would return. Their conversations began with innocent questions, Isaac asking what a rocket really feels like when it leaves the Earth, what Mars smells like, whether satellites ever get lonely. But soon, the boy's questions turned deeper. Is it better to know where you come from or where you're going? Do machines dream in numbers, or do they just pretend? What would happen if the stars forgot us? Elon didn't always have answers. And with Isaac, he didn't feel the need to. For perhaps the first time in years, he could exist without the pressure to explain or persuade. He could simply be. He started bringing Isaac small things, an audio device that played the sounds of planetary orbits translated into frequencies, a textured 3D printed model of a rocket engine, a book written in Braille about constellations. Isaac, in turn, shared stories he'd invented, whole galaxies where ships were made of song, and planets could only be reached by following the right melody. His imagination was vast, intricate, and untethered by sight. It was built on feeling, rhythm, intuition. Elon would sit, listening, realizing slowly, and with growing awe that the boy wasn't trying to impress him. He was just sharing his world. And in that world, Elon wasn't the billionaire, the visionary, the enigma. He was just a man with questions. One afternoon, as the late sun filtered through the high window, turning the dust in the air into gold, Isaac reached out his hand and rested it gently over Elon's. "You don't have to be alone, you know," he said, not as advice, but as an invitation. Elon didn't answer at first. His throat felt dry. "How do you know I feel that way?" Isaac tilted his head. "Because I've sat in the dark too. But sometimes it's not the darkness that hurts. It's the echo." That night, Elon lay awake in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling, unable to unhear those words. It's not the darkness that hurts. It's the echo. He thought of his own childhood, brilliant but solitary, hungry for answers no one else was asking. He thought of the recent discovery of Casa Aurora not just being a place he supported, but where his life had once quietly begun. And he thought of Isaac, that small boy with unseeing eyes and unrelenting insight who had managed to touch something inside Elon that had long gone dormant. Compassion, not the performative kind, not charity or goodwill, but the kind that roots itself in kinship, quiet, irrational, and utterly real. He hadn't expected to find it here. He hadn't expected to feel found. By the end of the week, Elon's team had begun drawing up plans for structural renovations, staff increases, and a long-term educational initiative. But Elon knew something else was taking shape, something no blueprint could contain. He wasn't just helping Casa Aurora. He was being changed by it. And in the quiet under that old window, beside a boy who touched the world without seeing it, Elon began to remember how to feel. The days passed like chapters Elon didn't know he was reading. He returned to Casa Aurora as often as his schedule allowed, discreetly, with no press, no formal announcements, no grand gestures. He didn't arrive in suits or with entourages. Sometimes he brought books, other times a thermos of tea. But always, he found Isaac sitting near the same sun-warmed window, cross-legged, patient, as if the hours hadn't moved at all since their last meeting. There was something magnetic about the boy, not flashy or precocious, but quietly gravitational. Isaac spoke little at first, but when he did, his words landed in the air like stones in still water, rippling long after they were spoken. "You came back," Isaac would say, without needing to hear footsteps. "I was wondering if the stars let you go." Elon never asked how the boy always knew it was him. There was no reason to. Isaac felt people the way others saw them. He didn't just sense presence, he absorbed it. They would sit for long stretches, saying very little. It was the kind of silence that felt full rather than empty. And when Isaac did speak, it was always worth listening to. "Have you ever thought," he asked one afternoon, "that the silence of space isn't really silence? That it's just full of possibilities waiting to be chosen?" Elon looked at the boy, startled. Then he laughed, not mockingly, but with something soft and awed. "You speak like you've been there." Isaac smiled. "Maybe I have. In pieces." Their bond deepened in ways that had nothing to do with science or legacy. Isaac had a quiet genius about him, but it wasn't intellectual in the traditional sense. He didn't quote formulas or invent theories. His brilliance lay in the way he read between things, in the spaces people left unspoken. One afternoon, Elon brought a small box containing a prototype from one of his earliest projects, just a simple circuit system that could light up with a gentle hum when completed correctly. He placed it on the floor between them. "Think you can figure it out?" Isaac reached out, tracing the shapes slowly with his fingers. He was quiet for a while, and then his face lit up, not from the device, but from something deeper. "This feels like you, but smaller. Like you before you had to become something." Elon froze. "What do you mean?" Isaac tilted his head. "I don't know exactly. It just feels like you used to sit right here, with something like this. Long ago." It hit Elon like a half-remembered dream, too blurry to grasp, but too specific to ignore. The way the air smelled in that hallway. the texture of the floor beneath him. Something in his chest stirred, uncomfortable and aching. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. He walked the quiet halls of his Texas home and stared at the stars. There were thousands of data points and achievements orbiting his name, but this feeling Isaac had stirred didn't fit in a chart or a spreadsheet. It felt ancient, personal, familiar. The next day, when he returned, Isaac greeted him with something clutched tightly in both hands. It was a drawing, not ink on paper, but a raised image made from textured lines, clearly created with care and precision. "For you," Isaac said, holding it out. Elon took it gently. He ran his fingers across the raised shapes. A building, Casa Aurora, unmistakable in its outline. And in the center, a woman holding a baby in her arms. "Is that," Elon began, his voice unsteady. "Is that me?" Isaac nodded slowly. "I think so. I saw it in a dream. Or maybe it was a memory. Maybe yours." Elon looked up, trying to steady the rush of emotion that flooded him. "Why would I forget something like that?" "Maybe it wasn't the kind of forgetting you choose," Isaac said. "Maybe it was the kind that happens when no one gives you the words to remember with." Elon stared at the image again. He thought of May, of her trembling voice when he first confronted her. "You always were my son." But here, in this room, with this boy who couldn't see him, yet somehow saw him better than anyone else ever had, Elon began to question whether this was less about discovering a forgotten past and more about finding his way back to it. That afternoon, as the sun stretched long fingers across the floor, Elon lingered. Not because he had more to say, but because he no longer wanted to leave. He watched Isaac as the boy sat silently again, fingers running over the circuit board they had finished earlier, humming softly to himself. Not a song exactly, more like a vibration, a thread connecting him to something just out of reach. And then Elon realized he didn't come back to Casa Aurora because he felt responsible. He came back because he felt invited. There was a gravity here he hadn't felt in decades, the kind that pulls not down but inward. And in the center of that pull stood a boy who could see without sight, feel without fear, and ask questions with no need for answers. In Isaac's presence, Elon felt less like a creator and more like someone still being created. The realization was both terrifying and beautiful. He was being rewritten, not by history or science or legacy, but by a child who had no reason to impress him, and who, with each word and silence, reminded him that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to be gained in being known than in being admired. As the sky darkened and the sound of laughter rose faintly from the distant courtyard, Elon turned back to Isaac. "Do you think I'm supposed to be here?" he asked quietly. Isaac didn't hesitate. "I think you always were. You just forgot your way home." The late afternoon sun fell gently over Casa Aurora, casting a warm light through the back windows and bathing the courtyard in shades of amber and rust. Elon, walking alone near the rear of the orphanage, wasn't looking for anything. He had come outside to breathe, to collect his thoughts after another long conversation with Isaac. But just as he passed a narrow corridor near the old storage wing, something caught his eye, an uneven floor tile, slightly raised. Curious, he stepped closer and noticed the edge of a weathered cardboard box poking out from beneath an abandoned shelf. Dust covered its top in a thick coat, and the cardboard had gone soft with age. He pulled it free slowly, careful not to tear it apart, and placed it gently on a nearby bench. Inside were records, the kind nobody expects to find intact: worn folders, brittle sheets of yellowing paper, faded photographs, and handwritten letters bound with a silk ribbon now frayed by time. He sifted through them without urgency, as if afraid that rushing would scare the past away. One of the envelopes stood out immediately. Its paper was thinner than the others, crinkled at the corners, and sealed with a piece of dry tape long since lost its stickiness. Elon opened it slowly. Inside was a letter written in elegant, slanted handwriting, feminine, flowing, familiar. It began simply, "His name is Elon. He has his father's eyes, but my heart." Elon blinked. "If one day he asks, tell him I did this out of love, Not shame, not fear. Just love. I knew I could never give him a life he deserved, but I could choose someone who could. May is that someone. She will love him like I do. Perhaps even more. It was signed, Eva. That name again, Eva. He stared at the page for what felt like a lifetime. He ran his fingers over the letters, as if the ink might carry her voice. A strange current passed through him, not grief exactly, and not anger, but something suspended between the two. A quiet ache, a yearning for someone he never knew, but who once held him close and made the hardest choice a mother can make. Then something else clicked, faint but certain. That handwriting. He'd seen it before. A single folded slip of paper tucked in the corner of May's old keepsake box back in Texas. He had glanced at it once years ago, never thinking much of it. But now he remembered the lines, the shape of the letters. They matched. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a voice from his origin calling out across decades. That evening, dinner was quiet. The children were eating in the main hall, and the staff had gathered around the kitchen. Elon sat at a small table with May near the front window, the sky behind her bleeding purple and navy. He waited until their plates were mostly empty before sliding the letter across the table. May looked at it, then at him. She didn't reach for it right away. "Where did you find this?" she asked softly. "In a box out back, buried behind old furniture. Did you know it was here?" She nodded slowly. "I did. I left it there." Elon's eyebrows drew together. "Why?" "Because I thought maybe one day, if the truth ever surfaced, it should come from her. Not just from me." "You knew her well," Elon said, voice steady. May's eyes welled, and she nodded again. "She was my closest friend. We met at university. She was brilliant, warm, but she came from a hard life. When she got pregnant, everything unraveled. Her family cut ties. She didn't know what to do. She begged me to help her, and then she asked me to take you." Elon sat still, hands clasped tightly together. "And you never told me. Not once. Because you were mine." Her voice cracked. "From the moment I held you. I loved you so fiercely, Elon. I thought if I told you, maybe that love wouldn't be enough." He looked away, jaw tight, swallowing down the weight in his throat. "I don't blame you," he said after a long pause. "But it hurts. It hurts not to have known. To think back on my life and realize there was a missing piece, and no one ever thought to show it to me." May reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "If I could go back, I would tell you everything from the start. I wish I had. But even now, even with everything, I wouldn't change what we built together." Elon's lips trembled slightly, but he didn't pull his hand away. "It's strange," he murmured. "I came here to help save this place. But I think maybe it's this place that's saving me." May smiled through her tears. "You were born here, Elon, in more ways than one." And then the silence returned, not cold, but necessary. A pause that held the weight of shared memory and unspoken forgiveness. Elon stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Somewhere in that building, Isaac was probably drawing again or humming a melody only he could hear. The walls of Casa Aurora now seemed to whisper to him, not as a stranger returning to fix what was broken, but as someone rediscovering who he had always been. When he turned back to May, his eyes were red. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "For what?" "For saying yes. For becoming my mother. Even if the truth came late, the love never did." That night, Elon didn't return to his hotel. He stayed at Casa Aurora, in one of the small guest rooms by the back. It was modest, a narrow bed, a desk, a single lamp. But it was enough. He kept Eva's letter beside him on the nightstand, unfolded, as if the ink itself might breathe in the silence. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, he slept not as a builder of rockets or an architect of futures, but as a son. And that somehow felt more real than anything he had ever launched into the stars. The air at Casa Aurora felt different. Where once there had been the tired hush of survival, now there was the hum of renewal, of plans being drawn and futures reimagined. The streets of Pretoria that surrounded the orphanage were still quiet, lined with jacarandas whose blooms painted violet memories across cracked pavement. But within the gates, something extraordinary was happening. Elon had poured in funding from his own foundation discreetly. No press conferences, no speeches, no announcements. What began as an urgent effort to keep the orphanage from shutting down had become something much deeper, an act of return, of rebuilding, and perhaps of redemption. He had hired not just builders, but thinkers. Architects who understood childhood, engineers who believed in accessibility, pedagogues who prioritized empathy as much as excellence. The design brief was simple: create a place that preserved the soul of Casa Aurora, but gave its children the tools of tomorrow. One wing of the old building was left untouched, its scuffed walls, hand-painted murals, and wooden beams kept intact as a museum of resilience. But the rest was transformed. Bright, sunlit classrooms with tactile materials for children like Isaac. Dormitories with individual spaces, personalized and dignified. Bathrooms with heated floors and gentle lighting. Gardens designed with winding, sensory paths. At the back of the property, where overgrown weeds once tangled with rusted tricycles, stood a new jewel, the Isaac Center for Discovery. It was a sleek, single-story building with glass walls and smooth white surfaces, outfitted with a state-of-the-art science and technology lab. Here, every station could be navigated by voice, touch, or sound. The center didn't just accommodate disability, it anticipated brilliance in all its forms. Isaac, the boy with clouded eyes and a mind that saw galaxies in silence, had become Elon's unofficial shadow. The child now spent hours alongside engineers and developers, testing adaptive interfaces, challenging algorithms, and asking questions no adult had dared to phrase. "You're not just solving problems," Elon told him once, watching as Isaac built a touch-sensitive music interface. "You're reimagining them." Isaac tilted his head slightly, sensing Elon's closeness. "I'm just playing," he replied, his fingers running across textured panels. "I think play is how truth hides until we're ready." The comment stayed with Elon for days. How many Isaacs had the world lost to closed doors and low expectations? How many children had lived entire lives within the shadow of invisibility? Donna Irene, her posture straighter now and her eyes less burdened, remained at the helm of Casa Aurora. Elon had offered her early retirement and full benefits. She had laughed, grateful but firm. "I was never just guarding walls," she said. "I was guarding seeds. And now, finally, they're blooming." She had a team now: caregivers, therapists, tutors. Her office had been renovated, but she kept her old wooden chair. It squeaked every time she sat, and she said the sound reminded her to listen for what creaked, not just what shined. One afternoon, Elon and Isaac sat outside on a bench made from the salvaged wood of the original playground. Children ran around them, laughing. The wind rustled through the trees. "You've changed this place," Isaac said suddenly. "No," Elon replied softly. "This place changed me." He meant it. What had started as an obligation born of guilt, or maybe roots, had become something sacred. He no longer saw Casa Aurora as a chapter he'd missed. He saw it as a beginning he'd been too young to remember, and one he was now old enough to honor. The children responded to the changes with joy and curiosity. They called the new lab the spaceship. They pretended the gardens were secret forests. And they followed Elon around like ducklings, giggling when he tripped over toys or mispronounced Zulu words. One Sunday, they gathered him into the courtyard with the promise of a meeting, only to surprise him with a performance. The space had been transformed. Colored paper lanterns hung from trees, and rugs were spread over the ground. The older kids sang. The younger ones danced. Then came Isaac. He stepped forward with a small note in Braille held in his hand and spoke slowly, clearly. "Not all love comes from blood," he said. "Sometimes it comes from choice. Sometimes it finds you when you think you're the one doing the finding." Elon's throat closed. Around him, adults were wiping tears. May, seated beside Irene, reached for her son's hand. But Elon didn't look at her. His eyes were on Isaac, whose calm voice carried through the courtyard like sunlight through storm clouds. "You can build rockets to leave Earth," the boy continued, "but it's harder to build something that keeps you here. Like a home, like a name, like love." The children applauded. Elon didn't move. He couldn't. His chest ached with a tenderness he didn't know how to name. He felt cracked open. That night, back at the guest house, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, thinking of a boy who had never seen his face, but somehow knew his soul. A boy who had rebuilt parts of Elon he hadn't known were broken. He remembered Isaac's words, "Not all love comes from blood." He whispered them again to the ceiling. The idea had been circling for weeks, unspoken. But now it landed. Elon Musk, father of satellites, innovator of industries, seeker of the stars, was thinking about adoption. Not as charity, not as repayment, but as the beginning of a new kind of orbit. One not defined by gravity, but by choice. The house was quiet now. Not the silence of neglect or emptiness, but the kind that settles gently after a day full of meaning. Elon walked alone through the newly renovated corridors of Casa Aurora, his footsteps echoing softly against polished floors that had once creaked under uncertainty. The walls were painted in calming earth tones, scattered with murals the children had created, solar systems and handprints, stories in color. Yet even beneath the fresh paint, something older pulsed. There was history here, and Elon felt it brushing against him like a faint current, warm and familiar. He paused outside what had once been the nursery. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a new crib stood in the corner, flanked by shelves of donated books and soft blankets. There was no child there now, only moonlight pooling on the floor. Still, it stirred something in him, a grief for what he'd never known, and a gratitude for what he was finally discovering. Outside, the night air was cool and still. He stepped into the courtyard, drawn toward the sound of laughter. Under the large jacaranda tree, still blooming, always blooming, Isaac was sitting cross-legged on the grass, surrounded by 3 younger children. They were holding one another's hands, spinning a game made entirely of words and sound. Isaac was leading them. His head was tilted back, his blind eyes turned toward the stars he could not see, and yet he laughed as if he knew exactly where they were. Elon leaned against the tree, watching. He hadn't meant to stay this long tonight, but something had tethered him here, something old, unnamed, and insistent. A soft rustling beside him. It was May. She sat beside him in silence for a while, like only mothers know how to do. Not rushing, not filling the space, just being there. "You look at peace," she finally said, her voice low, textured with years of both strength and regret. Elon didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Isaac, who was now gently guiding a younger boy's hand toward the ground to feel a beetle crawling in the grass. For the first time, he murmured, "I think I understand where I came from." May inhaled slowly. "And do you know where you're going?" He looked at her. "Not exactly," he said, "but maybe I don't have to go alone." She smiled at that, a tired, knowing smile. No one ever should. That night stayed with him. By morning, he had made his decision. He didn't announce it. There was no grand conversation or public moment. Elon Musk simply made a phone call to the appropriate agency and requested the beginning of adoption proceedings for Isaac. The official overseeing the case, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, was stunned at first. "You're serious?" he asked. "I've never been more," Elon replied. The paperwork moved faster than anyone expected. Partly because of Elon's name, yes, but also because of the sheer clarity of the request. There were no complications, no relatives to notify, no one to oppose it, just a boy who had waited his whole life for a home, and a man who had finally recognized what home meant. When the time came to tell Isaac, Elon found himself unexpectedly nervous. He found the boy in the new tech lab, working on a voice-controlled sensor that could detect texture through vibration. Elon knelt beside him quietly, watching him test the sensitivity with different fabrics. "I have something to ask you," Elon said. Isaac paused, turned his head slightly, listening. "Yes." Elon cleared his throat. "How would you feel if I asked to be your dad?" There was a beat. a breath. Then Isaac smiled calmly, like he'd been expecting it all along. "I knew." "You knew what?" "That my place was with you, because your silence never scared me." Elon blinked quickly, not trusting himself to speak. He reached out, and Isaac's small hand found his immediately. Their fingers locked. The official adoption was set for the following week. It wasn't a ceremony, just a room, a few signatures, and a judge in a humble office in Pretoria. But the location mattered because it was the very same building where, decades earlier, May had once walked in holding a baby boy named Elon Reeve. She was there again now, standing beside her grown son as he stood for his own son. The judge read the decree aloud, and with a final signature, the child who had once lived in quiet corners of Casa Aurora became Isaac Musk. And Elon became a father. The gravity of that title didn't hit him until that evening, when they returned to Casa Aurora, and Isaac asked if he could sleep in the same room for the night. "Just until it feels normal," he said. Elon pulled a mattress next to the boy's bed and laid there in the soft dark, listening to Isaac's breath slow into sleep. Outside, wind moved gently through the jacaranda leaves. Inside, time folded over itself. The orphanage had once given Elon life, then forgotten, then remembered, and now it had given him something more than life. It had given him a reason. In the stillness, he whispered words he had never spoken aloud. "I needed you to." And somewhere, though Isaac was asleep, the boy's lips curved upward, as if he'd heard them anyway. The past had finally circled back, not as a weight, but as a gift. A full, quiet circle drawn in the ink of memory, truth, and love. The cycle was complete, but the story was just beginning. The house in Texas didn't change much on the outside, but inside, everything felt different. The shift wasn't loud or sudden. It arrived like sunlight at dawn, slowly, insistently, until it filled every room. Elon's life had always been a succession of projects, deadlines, headlines. The chaos of ambition. But with Isaac now living under his roof, the rhythm of the days softened. There were no radical reinventions, no artificial intelligence systems managing every second of their time. Just mornings and evenings. Laughter. Quiet. A different kind of electricity. "Only promise me one thing," Isaac had said that first night, tucked under a blanket, his blind glasses resting on the nightstand. His voice was calm, almost amused. "Promise you won't travel too much." Elon, caught off guard, had smiled. "No one's ever asked me for less before." And that was the beginning. May had moved into the guest house temporarily, which soon became permanently. She cooked breakfast most mornings and insisted on doing it herself, even when staff offered. Isaac loved her scrambled eggs, fluffy, buttery, and the quiet way she hummed old jazz tunes while stirring the pan. Elon, watching from a kitchen table, found something in those mornings that not even Mars could offer. Isaac attended a nearby school that specialized in inclusive education. The building was small, nestled in a grove of pecan trees, and filled with tactile art and books printed in Braille. Every afternoon, he returned home buzzing with questions. "Did you know sound can paint?" he asked one evening, plopping down on a rug with a grin. "Sound?" Elon asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yeah, Miss Robbins played a cello piece, and I saw blue. Not with my eyes, but like in my chest." He pressed a hand over his heart. Elon was quiet for a moment. "You might be teaching me more than your school's teaching you." Isaac chuckled. "That's because you ask good questions, even when you don't say them out loud." Their evenings became rituals. Sometimes it was reading, sometimes tinkering. Once Elon brought home a small robotics kit with audio sensors, and Isaac spent a whole weekend redesigning it to respond to variations in wind sounds. When the robot finally turned at the whistle of a breeze, he clapped in delight. "I didn't need to see it move," he said softly. "I felt it shift." And Elon, who had spent his life building rockets to escape gravity, felt himself finally land. There were still meetings, of course, calls, 1,000 things demanding his attention, but the priorities had changed. He traveled less, delegated more. He carved out time not just for Isaac, but because of him. Dad, Isaac asked one afternoon as they sat on the porch, did you know sometimes we find what we need in the thing we never expected? Elon blinked. What do you mean? You kept looking for me in the future, but I was always in your past, in the place you came from. The words hit like a soft earthquake, shaking not the structure, but the foundation. It was true. Isaac had been there all along, in the halls of Casa Aurora, in the silence Elon never understood as a child, in the ache that drove him without knowing what he was running toward. It had always been about coming home. They started visiting shelters together. Quiet visits. No press, no Twitter threads. Just backpacks filled with toys, stories, and time. Elon didn't speak as much as he listened, watched as Isaac sat among the children, his calm presence like gravity pulling them into stillness. He told stories, improvised fairy tales with robots and stars and floating trees. Why do they listen to you like that? Elon asked after one visit. Because I don't talk at them, Isaac said with a grin. I talk with them. That winter, they built a workshop behind the house. Nothing fancy, wooden shelves, toolkits, a 3D printer Elon had lying around. It became their laboratory of wonder. Isaac loved the scent of sawdust, the click of a soldering iron, the whir of a motor coming to life. He navigated the space by memory and sound, gliding between tables with the grace of someone who belonged. One night, Elon found him asleep at the workbench, a half-assembled wind chime made of old keys in his hands. A piece of paper rested beside him. A sketch in raised ink, Casa Aurora with a rocket on the roof. At the bottom, it said in Braille, where stories take off. Elon didn't wake him. He just sat beside his son, hand resting on his shoulder, watching the way Isaac's chest rose and fell in sleep. For all the world's noise, this silent rhythm was what mattered most. He used to chase progress. Now he nurtured presence. He used to dream in code. Now he listened in metaphor. He used to believe he was building the future. Now he knew. The future was a boy with clouded eyes and a mind like stardust who had taught him how to be still long enough to feel the world instead of fixing it. And for the first time, Elon didn't want to change everything. He just wanted to keep this life, this quiet, this unexpected joy. And perhaps in the end, that was the change the world had been waiting for. The rain came gently at first, just a mist brushing the windows of the car. But by the time Elon and Isaac reached the gate of Casa Aurora, it was falling with a steady rhythm that made the world feel quieter, as if the sky were asking for silence. Elon stepped out and opened the door for his son. Isaac reached for his father's arm with practiced ease. Though the boy was blind, he never hesitated. He always knew where Elon was. Rain smells different here, Isaac said as he tilted his head slightly, breathing in. It smells like stories waiting to happen. Elon smiled softly. It's good to be back, huh? Isaac nodded and, without waiting, ran ahead in the direction of the main house. Elon watched him go, his small figure darting across the courtyard, soaked to the knees, but laughing. Inside the refurbished halls of Casa Aurora, warmth greeted them. The formerly cracked tiles had been replaced, the peeling paint gone. Bright murals stretched across the walls, some painted by volunteers, some by the children themselves. And yet, somehow, the soul of the place had remained untouched. Elon followed the sound of giggles and chatter. Isaac had already found his way to one of the dormitory rooms, where he was being pulled into a circle of children sitting on colorful rugs, books and toy robots scattered around. His laughter filled the room like music. Standing in the doorway, Elon was approached by Irene. Her frame was slightly more hunched than the last time he'd seen her, but her eyes were as sharp and kind as ever. He's happy, she said, her voice quiet but certain. Elon didn't take his eyes off the children. And so am I. Irene gave a soft hum of agreement. Come, I want to show you something. She led him down the newly built corridor toward the back of the property. The rain tapped gently against the high windows, and their footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor. They reached the entrance to a room Elon had heard about but never seen finished. The library. It was stunning. A wide, open space filled with shelves of books, many in Braille, some in multiple languages. Plush cushions were arranged around reading corners, and in the center, a tree-shaped sculpture made of polished driftwood stretched up toward a ceiling made entirely of glass. Through that ceiling, the storm clouds rolled softly above, and even in their grayness, there was light. Elon turned in awe, but it wasn't just the beauty of the space that held him. It was the inscription painted delicately along the far wall, above the shelves, written in childlike print. Every child deserves a constellation to guide them. His breath caught. Who wrote that? Irene's voice was gentle. Isaac. He told one of our volunteers what to write. Said it was how he wanted to thank you. Elon closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. It wasn't the thank you that moved him, but the imagery. A constellation, a guide, something to belong to in the vastness. Later that evening, the rain had stopped and the road back to Texas was quiet, lined with trees that shimmered in the wet dusk. They didn't speak much on the ride. Isaac sat with his headphones on, listening to an audiobook, his fingers moving slightly with the rhythm of the narrator's voice. Back home, the house smelled of ginger tea and warm blankets. May had left a note on the kitchen counter, dinner's in the oven. Be gentle with his heart tonight. Elon knew what she meant. He found Isaac sitting cross-legged on his bed, holding one of his tactile drawings, a raised sketch of the library's tree sculpture. Did you like it? Isaac asked, not lifting his head. I loved it. I hope it makes the other kids feel like they can go anywhere. Elon sat beside him. Isaac, can we talk for a second? The boy turned slightly, attentive. I want to make a promise to you, Elon said, his voice lower now, more grounded. No matter where I am, no matter what happens, you'll never have to wonder if I'm coming back. You'll never feel alone. Isaac didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, he reached out and took Elon's hand, running his small fingers across his father's knuckles, memorizing the moment. I promise the same, he said. Even when you're far away, I'll always be right here, listening. They sat like that for a while, no fanfare, no grand declarations, just a simple silence wrapped in understanding. It was more than an agreement. It was a bond. A bridge between a man and a boy who had both once been lost and had now, by some act of the universe, or perhaps just by grace, found each other. The promise was not made of obligation. It wasn't made of rescue or duty. It was made of something stronger, of choice, of love freely given and received. That night, Elon watched Isaac sleep, his small chest rising and falling steadily, the lines of worry that once lived on his face now replaced with peace. Outside the window, the stars were just starting to push through the remnants of rain clouds. A constellation, Elon thought, not just in the sky, but right here in this house, in this family. In the boy who saw without eyes, and the man who finally understood what it meant to be seen. The promise had been made, and it would be kept. It began with a single broadcast, a brief, heartfelt news segment about the rebirth of a forgotten orphanage in Pretoria, Casa Aurora. A reporter, visibly moved, had walked the halls with Irene Bennett, capturing scenes of laughter, color, new beginnings. The story, small by media standards, aired on a quiet Sunday morning. But something about it reached people. And soon, letters started to arrive. Not emails, not tweets, actual letters. They came from cities and villages, from people in their 30s, 60s, and 90s. Some wrote shakily, others in neat cursive. The envelopes bore stamps from every continent. Most began the same way. I once knew Casa Aurora. Elon's team at the foundation opened them in batches. They read about the boy who was taught how to tie his shoes by Irene in 1974. The woman who returned to volunteer as a cook after raising 6 kids of her own. A man who sent a photograph of himself at age 5, standing in front of the same jacaranda tree now shading the garden where Isaac played. But one envelope didn't have a return address. Just a small, hand-drawn rocket on the front, wobbly but intentional. No name, no country stamp. Just a symbol that, strangely, stirred something in Elon's chest before he even opened it. Inside, he found a folded sheet of aging paper, thick, off-white, the edges soft with time. It was handwritten with a steady, graceful script. Eva, his mother, his first mother. May saw the name and froze. She held the letter gently, almost reverently, her fingertips brushing the ink like it was a page of scripture. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. For a long moment, she just looked at Elon. "I think," she said finally, "it's time you read this." Elon sat down slowly. The room was quiet, the windows open to the afternoon air. A breeze moved the curtain just slightly, and with it, a familiar scent, wet earth and jasmine. He unfolded the letter. "My son, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write it. When I held you for the first time, you didn't cry. You just looked at me, eyes wide, silent. I knew then that you were already full of worlds. I made the hardest choice a mother can make, but I did it so you could grow with safety, with opportunity, with love. I don't know if you'll ever know my name, but I hope you remember the soil beneath your roots. Fly as high as you want, but don't forget the ground where you began. With all the love a mother can hold. Eva." He didn't move for a while after reading it. Then he folded it again, deliberately like something sacred, and tucked it into the breast pocket of his shirt. Later that evening, as he prepared Isaac for bed, he was quieter than usual. He helped the boy wash up, then listened as he described the plot of story he'd heard at school. Isaac always told stories as if they had just happened, like time was a circle, not a line. As they settled into the low light of the bedroom, Isaac leaned against Elon's side. "You have a sad voice today," he said softly. Elon blinked, caught off guard. "Do I?" Isaac nodded. "It sounds like when you remember something you don't want to remember, but can't forget either." Elon smiled faintly. "That's exactly what it is. Was it about your mom? The one before Grandma May?" Elon looked at him. "Yes. She wrote me a letter. From a long time ago." Isaac didn't press. He simply laid his head on Elon's shoulder and was quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, "You don't have to go back there. Just walk forward. I'll walk with you." And just like that, something shifted. The sadness didn't leave, but it loosened its grip. The ache of abandonment turned just slightly into soil, deep, rich, capable of giving life. That night, long after Isaac had drifted into sleep, Elon sat in his study, the letter from Eva resting beside an untouched cup of tea. He stared at the words, not with anger, not with longing, but with resolve. In the morning, he gathered his team. "We're creating something new," he said. "A foundation. Its name will be Project Eva." He stood beside a whiteboard, his voice calm but passionate. "It won't be about me. It won't carry my name. It'll carry hers. And it'll be for every child who feels unseen, who falls between the cracks, who has potential but no platform. We'll fund schools. We'll train caregivers. We'll build bridges for children who think the world forgot them." Someone asked if there would be a launch event, a press release. Elon shook his head. No fanfare, just action. And that was how it began. Project Eva, a future for the invisible. A quiet name with a vast purpose. Within weeks, the foundation had connected with orphanages in 5 countries. A grant was given to Casa Aurora to create a mentorship program where former residents would return to guide the children now there. A library in Mexico, a science lab in Ghana, a new roof in the Philippines, and all of it born from a letter written by a woman who once believed she would never be remembered. Back in Texas, Elon pinned that letter to a small corkboard above his desk. Not framed, not preserved behind glass, just tacked with a pushpin like any reminder. Next to it, a sketch drawn by Isaac, a boy reaching upward, surrounded by tiny stars. The constellation was forming, and this time, no one would be invisible. The ceremony was nothing like a launch. There were no camera crews, no velvet ropes, no echoing speeches in vast halls. Just a quiet garden under the jacaranda tree at Casa Aurora, where children sat cross-legged on handmade quilts, their small faces bright with anticipation. The scent of jasmine floated in the air. Lanterns hung from low branches, swaying gently in the breeze. It was the kind of event that could easily go unnoticed by the world. And yet, for those present, it felt like history. Elon stood off to the side at first, his hands in his pockets, watching as Isaac took center stage, not on a platform, but on a small wooden crate borrowed from the kitchen. The boy wore a deep green shirt, the color of forest leaves after rain, and his blind glasses reflected the flickering lanterns. He cleared his throat once, then spoke with ease. "Welcome to the launch of something small," he said, "because the small things are where the light begins." The crowd, mostly children, caretakers, and volunteers, fell still. "This is the start of the EVA Foundation," Isaac continued. "Named after someone I didn't know, but who gave life to the man who gave life to this dream." Elon's throat tightened. Isaac raised a hand, palm open. "We're not just fixing buildings. We're planting seeds. In places where there's silence, we'll plant music. In places where there's loneliness, we'll plant stories. And where there's darkness," he paused, smiling toward the sky, "we'll light a path." Applause broke out, not loud, but full of warmth. Like a fire that knows it can grow. Instead of the usual ribbon cutting, the children each held a small candle in a paper cup. On cue, they lit them one by one, forming a slow spiral on the ground until the center glowed with dozens of tiny flames. They called it the first constellation. Later that night, back in Texas, the website for the EVA Foundation went live. Its homepage was simple, a world map in soft navy tones and dozens of pulsing yellow lights. Each light represented a child helped, a facility rebuilt, a scholarship granted, a place where someone was no longer forgotten. Over the weeks that followed, the map began to shift. New lights appeared in Bolivia, Uganda, Romania, and Nepal. A school in the Philippines received tactile learning devices. A kitchen in a Kenyan shelter was renovated with solar stoves. In northern Canada, a dormitory reopened with heating for the first time in years. And each time a new light blinked into place, Isaac would shout, "It grew again, Dad," and rush to the tablet on the dining table. They made it a routine, checking the map before bedtime. Elon would pull up the screen and Isaac, fingers moving carefully over the raised surface of the tactile globe he designed, would whisper, "Tell me where it shines tonight." Elon would describe the place in detail, the mountains, the streets, the faces of the people. They would imagine the sounds, the smells, the stories happening there now because someone somewhere believed again. And every time, Isaac would whisper, "We're not alone anymore." The foundation ran differently than anything Elon had done before. There were no boardrooms, no ego, just intention. He funded the structure, yes, but it was the volunteers who became its soul. Mothers offered time. Teachers shared curricula. Engineers invented accessible tools. Farmers offered food. Retired musicians volunteered to teach rhythm and memory through sound. A janitor from Sao Paulo sent in a hand-drawn blueprint for modular bunk beds that could be folded to create space for storytelling circles. It was as if the world had been waiting for someone to whisper, "You are needed." And once whispered, 100,000 hands rose quietly in response. During a press briefing, a journalist asked, "Mr. Musk, what's your mission statement for the foundation?" Elon hesitated, then said, "We're not donating money. We're returning dignity." The quote spread widely, but it wasn't a slogan. It was something deeper, an understanding that resources without respect were empty. And respect began with listening. The team maintained a live dashboard of impact, not dollars, but meals served, books delivered, roofs repaired, therapists hired. Each number was paired with a name, a face, a note in a child's own handwriting whenever possible. But it wasn't just the world that began to change. Elon did, too. There was a shift inside him, something long restless finally beginning to settle. That ancient tug toward the stars hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, reshaped itself. He no longer felt driven to escape gravity. He felt called to explore it differently, not above, but within. One afternoon, while fixing a broken drawer in the study, he paused and stared at a small photograph on the wall. It was one of the constellation candles from the launch, with Isaac kneeling to light one with his fingers. The flame had caught just as his face turned slightly toward it, casting his features in gold. Elon touched the frame lightly. "You built this," he whispered. When he told Isaac that night about the Foundation's expansion into Cambodia, the boy grinned and replied, "That means it's shining while we sleep." And indeed, the stars on their map glowed at all hours, like pulse points in the darkness. Not large, not flashy, just steady. And perhaps that was the most important discovery of all, that the brightest changes didn't always arrive like rockets. Sometimes they came quietly, like a boy's voice in the dark, or a letter unopened for decades, or the flicker of a candle on unfamiliar soil, declaring, simply, "You are seen." The Texas sky was endless. Blue that bled into gold by late afternoon, brushing the tops of the mesquite trees in slow-moving light. And somewhere beneath that vast dome of quiet, on a piece of land far removed from noise and expectation, life had shifted. It had been several months since Isaac came to live at the ranch. At first, Elon thought the change would be logistical. A few renovations, a change in his travel schedule, new considerations for accessibility. But what unfolded was something he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the house that had to adjust to Isaac. It was Elon himself. The boy had arrived not with demands or resistance, but with a kind of reverent stillness, like someone stepping carefully into sacred ground. Isaac never asked for toys, though he was gifted many. What he requested instead was presence. "Just stay," he'd whispered one night as Elon tucked him into bed. "That's all." May, having moved in indefinitely, brought back a rhythm Elon had long forgotten. She made breakfast like she used to when he was small, quiet, efficient, full of warmth. She insisted on tidying up, though a team of staff could easily do it. "It's not about the house," she said. "It's about showing up." And so they all began to show up, for each other. Isaac flourished in this gentle structure. He rose early, made his bed with meticulous care, and padded barefoot across the wooden floors of the ranch. He could tell which room he was in by the acoustics, the smell, the texture beneath his toes. One afternoon, as they sat together on the wide front porch that overlooked the open plains, the boy tilted his face slightly toward the wind. "Dad," he asked, "why does the wind here feel different?" Elon turned from the book he was pretending to read. "Different how?" "It feels full, like it's carrying something, not just air." Elon smiled. "Maybe it carries promises now." Isaac grinned. "I thought so." He didn't need to see the landscape. He experienced it. The soil under his bare feet after a summer storm. The chirp of crickets measured against the hum of the windmill. The distance between one boot step and another. The way May's laughter ricocheted off the kitchen walls, or how Elon's breath slowed when he read aloud by the fireplace. Isaac felt it all. In the evenings, they had a ritual. After dinner, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the porch lights cast warm halos onto the gravel, Elon would read. Sometimes it was Hemingway, sometimes Sagan. Occasionally, stories Isaac made up himself. While Elon read, Isaac would sit nearby strumming the small acoustic guitar May had gifted him. His fingers moved carefully, unsure of chords, but confident in emotion. The sound was unpolished, but haunting, like the beginnings of a language just being remembered. The house had once been too quiet. A museum of solitude, echoes trapped in polished floors. But now it breathed. It had cadence, softness, small domestic sounds stitched with meaning. It had laughter again. One night, after putting Isaac to bed, Elon sat alone at the kitchen table and opened a leather-bound notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Notes on Becoming." He wasn't sure why. He only knew that since Isaac's arrival, something fundamental in him had begun to loosen. The version of himself that had always been slightly detached, brilliant, strategic, relentless, had begun to make room for something slower, more porous. He wrote, "Isaac listens with his whole body. He hears what I don't say. He feels what I try to hide. And somehow, he answers me without needing to know the question." Elon paused, pen resting against his lower lip, then continued, "He doesn't need light to see. He uses the dark like a painter uses shadow. He colors silence with meaning." The notebook became a kind of confessional, not of mistakes, but of awakening. Elon began jotting down the ways fatherhood was reprogramming him, not with guilt, but with grace. He once believed that shaping the future required control, precision, data. But now, through Isaac, he was learning something radical. That perhaps the greatest force in the universe was not power, but presence. And presence couldn't be engineered. It had to be lived. May noticed the change first. One morning, as Elon helped Isaac button his shirt, she watched from the doorway. "You've slowed down," she said later, sipping her coffee. "Is that a good thing?" he asked, half joking. "It's the best thing," she replied. "You're not running anymore." That evening, as a storm rolled across the plains, Isaac sat with Elon in the great room, listening to thunder in the distance. "I like the way it waits," the boy said. "What does?" "The thunder. It doesn't rush. It arrives when it's ready." Elon looked at him, realizing that the child wasn't just poetic, he was right. There was wisdom in stillness, in listening, in allowing moments to unfold. Isaac rested his head against his father's arm. "Sometimes I think you were waiting too." "For what?" "For me." Elon didn't answer right away. He only nodded and placed a hand over the boy's. That night, the wind outside picked up, carrying dust and the scent of wildflowers. The house groaned gently, as old houses do when they are loved. Elon stayed up writing until the small hours. He wrote about the sounds that shaped a day. The clink of Isaac's spoon, the shuffle of his steps, the rhythm of his breath when he slept. He wrote about the difference between being busy and being alive. And finally he wrote, "The past is not something we escape. It is something we learn to carry with both hands, so we have room to hold the present too." The storm passed by dawn. The land, freshly washed, shimmered in quiet renewal. And in the stillness that followed, a boy slept peacefully down the hall. And a man, once consumed by rockets and silence, finally knew what it meant to land. Life on the ranch in Texas had settled into something soft, steady, and unmistakably sacred. For the first time in decades, Elon found his days anchored not by launches or boardrooms, but by the rhythmic pulse of a life shared with two people who had gently, irrevocably changed his orbit, his son, Isaac, and his mother, May. Mornings began with the warmth of brewed coffee and the scent of buttered toast. May, ever precise, handling breakfast with the quiet dignity of someone who knew routine was a form of care. Isaac, still in his pajamas and gripping the edges of the kitchen counter with his bare feet planted firmly on the floor, would say, "I like the way this morning sounds." By now, Isaac had adjusted beautifully to his new school for visually impaired children. His natural curiosity flourished, and his teachers often commented on his unusual empathy, his ability to connect through voice and silence alike. "I don't need eyes to know who believes in me," he once told Elon casually, while threading beads onto a tactile art project. Elon, caught off guard by the simple weight of those words, had only nodded. They would echo in his chest for the rest of the day. Even as corporate demands pulled him toward airports and late-night calls, Elon preserved the sacredness of his shared time with Isaac. Breakfast was non-negotiable, so was bedtime reading. He discovered that nothing steadied his own inner chaos more than the weight of a child's head against his arm while reading stories about stars, machines, or faraway islands. As the seasons turned in Texas, the colors shifted on the ranch. The trees darkened into deeper greens. The wind changed its direction. Yet one thread remained unbroken, the invisible line that stretched between their lives and the worn grounds of the Casa Aurora in Pretoria. It had become increasingly difficult to visit South Africa in person. Logistics, time zones, global commitments all pressed inward, but the connection remained strong through other means. Every Sunday evening, Irene Bennett would appear on their screen, sometimes seated in her office, other times with children climbing over her lap. Her voice carried age and energy in equal measure, her presence filling the room as if she were just down the hall. "Elon," she'd say, "your boy lights up when the kids speak." And it was true. Isaac sat through every call as if absorbing each syllable into memory. He asked the children's names, repeated them quietly to himself, remembered their stories, their laughter, the inflections in their voices. "Don't forget to ask about Anna T," he told Elon once, the night before a call. "She laughed so beautifully last week. It made me feel like I could see her." It startled Elon sometimes how someone so young and without sight could hold others so clearly in his awareness. He watched Isaac's relationship with the orphanage bloom into something intimate and steady. The boy had never seen the grounds, never touched the old bricks or the garden soil, but he knew that place, knew its breath, its heartbeat. And perhaps more than anyone else, Isaac understood what it meant to be tethered to a home you couldn't always reach, yet still belonged to. With May's encouragement, father and son began writing a book together. Elon didn't know what compelled him to open a blank document one night and type, "Once upon a time, in a house full of sunrises," but he did. Isaac, seated beside him with his hands on a braille notepad, smiled. "That's a good beginning," he said, "but let's call it Hearts of Aurora, because that's what those kids are. Bright hearts." It became their evening ritual. One would speak, the other would transcribe. They invented characters based on real children from Mikasa, Lebo, who danced on the stairs, Tando, who hummed lullabies to himself in the quiet, Anna T, of course, who had the laugh that painted entire skies. Each story was a thread, a reminder, a declaration these lives mattered. Even from across continents, they stitched their hearts to the soil of a place that had once given Elon a beginning he hadn't even known to honor. Technology had become their bridge, not a replacement for presence, but a tool to stretch it further. Isaac called it listening with long arms. On harder days, when Elon returned late or the world weighed too heavily, it was Isaac who recentered him. "Tell me something about when you were little," he'd ask. And Elon, sometimes reluctant but often grateful, would share slivers. A toy train, the feeling of dust under bare feet, a song May used to sing on long car rides through dry landscapes. "See," Isaac would whisper, curling closer. "You remember?" "Yes," Elon would whisper back. "You help me remember." And in that way, memory became less about chronology and more about legacy, about what was passed through silence and eye contact, and in their case, through fingertips brushing pages, voices reading aloud, and long, quiet walks at sunset. Even as distance kept them physically apart from Mikasa Aurora, Elon and Isaac remained part of its breath, its vision. Their book, slowly taking shape chapter by chapter, began to travel. Irene shared it in weekly reading circles with the children. Volunteers translated the stories into Zulu, Xhosa, and Afrikaans. Teachers printed tactile versions for the visually impaired. And though the book wasn't finished, it was already doing what it needed to, letting each child know they were seen. One evening, while walking the edge of the pasture near their home, Isaac paused. "Dad," he said, tilting his face toward the night, "do you think Pretoria feels us too?" Elon looked at him, heart tightened by wonder. "I think," he said slowly, "it's impossible not to feel what's real." And as the wind blew over them both, carrying scents of earth and new grass, Elon realized that the roots he'd once believed were broken were not lost at all. They had simply grown longer, across continents, through stories, into something quietly eternal. The rain had arrived quietly that Saturday morning, as if the sky itself had decided to mourn something old and unnamed. Thunder murmured softly beyond the hills of the Texas ranch, and a steady rhythm of droplets tapped against the windows. Inside the warm house, the world felt suspended, hushed, intimate. Elon stood at the kitchen counter, stirring cream into his coffee, when he heard Isaac's footsteps approaching. The boy moved gently, with the quiet assurance of someone who knew his surroundings by heart, his fingers grazing the edges of the wall as he entered the room. "Dad." Isaac's voice was calm, but unusually deliberate. Elon turned, instantly alert to the change in tone. "Yeah, buddy. Can you tell me the truth again? That one from the beginning?" Elon set down his mug. He didn't need to ask what truth. Some things don't need repeating to be understood. He knelt to Isaac's level. "You mean about where I come from?" The boy nodded. "About the part you didn't know for a long time." Elon gave a small sigh and offered his hand. "Come on, let's sit." They moved into the living room, where the rain traced slow trails down the glass. Elon sat on the couch and pulled Isaac close. The boy's blind glasses reflected the soft amber light from a lamp nearby, but his face, open, patient, tuned in, seemed to illuminate the space all on its own. Elon spoke slowly. "I grew up thinking I knew where I began. I had a family. I had a story, and it made sense to me until it didn't anymore." Isaac tilted his head slightly, as if weighing the invisible weight of that statement. Elon continued, "I found out that I'd been adopted from a place called Casa Aurora far away. That my biological mother was someone named Eva. That my beginning was quieter, more hidden. Not less important, just buried." Isaac's legs swung gently off the edge of the couch. "Do you think it hurts more when someone doesn't tell the truth, or when we're too scared to ask?" Elon took a long breath. That question hit harder than anything he'd said so far. "I think," he paused, then turned to face his son directly. "I think the deepest hurt comes from not knowing who we are. And I think healing starts when someone stays by our side while we figure it out." Isaac reached out, found his father's hand, and clasped it tightly. "Then we're healing," he said simply. Elon felt something shift in his chest. Not just pain, not just love, but something older, more complex, recognition. This boy, who had known darkness since birth, had a way of cutting straight through the fog of unspoken things. His blindness had not dulled his insight. If anything, it sharpened it. For a while, they just sat there. The rain continued to fall, soft and steady. A clock ticked quietly in the background. And between them, a silent agreement had formed, one that said no truth was too heavy when shared. Eventually, Elon rose and returned with a small wooden box from his study. Inside were a few old letters, photos, and the now familiar envelope containing the letter from Eva. He held it up. "This was the only real voice I had from her," he said. "But I think there might be more. Things that were left behind. Things I never knew to look for." Isaac turned his head toward the box. "Then let's ask." "Ask who?" "The one who kept your first name safe all those years." Elon smiled. "Irene." Isaac nodded. "She knows the echoes." They spent the rest of the afternoon crafting a letter together. Elon dictated, and Isaac, ever precise with words, offered changes. "Don't say you're looking for closure," Isaac suggested. "Say you're opening space for understanding." Elon adjusted the sentence. "Don't ask what she knows," Isaac added. "Ask what she remembers. It's different." And it was. By the time they finished, the letter read less like a request and more like an invitation to revisit a story long paused mid-chapter. When they sealed the envelope, Isaac held it in his hands for a moment before handing it back. "Even if we don't find more," he said, "you found her once. That's not nothing." Elon's throat tightened. "It's everything." That night, May joined them in the den with a pot of chamomile tea. She'd been listening quietly from a hallway earlier, letting the moment unfold between father and son. As they sat together by the fireplace, Isaac curled between them. May ran her fingers gently through his curls, so like his mother's touch, Elon imagined. "You two are teaching each other things no school ever could," she said softly. Elon leaned his head back against the cushion. "He's the most honest mirror I've ever looked into." Isaac, already drifting towards sleep, murmured, "Then look again tomorrow." And Elon knew he would, because the boy beside him wasn't just part of his life now. He was the key to understanding it, rewriting it, and forgiving it. And through him, Elon had finally found the courage to ask the questions that had waited a lifetime for his voice. As the fire flickered and the rain began to fade, one truth remained, anchored and alive, that healing isn't found in erasing scars, but in naming them, in holding them, in saying, "This too is where I begin." The envelope was thin and cream-colored, its corners yellowed with time. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, slipped discreetly into the pile of mail on the kitchen table in Elon's Texas ranch house. Unlike the others, bills, invitations, documents from ongoing projects, this one bore no logo, no barcode, no return address. Just a delicate, fading handwriting in black ink to Mr. Elon Musk. May was the one who noticed it first. Her fingers trembled as she held it up in the sunlight streaming through the window. "It's from Irene," she said softly. Elon, seated at the table with Isaac beside him, looked up. He immediately recognized the weight in his mother's voice. Without needing to ask, he knew. This was about Eva. They waited until the house was quiet. May closed the kitchen door gently. Elon placed the envelope on the table like a sacred artifact. Isaac sat next to him, small hands folded in silence, sensing the gravity in the air. His glasses reflected the window light, but his pale, clouded eyes were turned toward his father, seeing not with sight, but with a boy's unerring intuition. Elon opened the envelope carefully. Inside, there were several neatly folded sheets. The first was a brief letter from Irene, handwritten in her familiar, strong cursive. Queridos Elon e May, encontrei esses arquivos guardados com registros confidenciais da Casa Aurora. Há menções a uma jovem chamada Eva Jansen. Não posso afirmar com certeza, mas acredito que vocês saberão o que fazer com isso. Com carinho, Irene. Below the letter were copies of old intake forms, yellowed with age. One of them, dated June 1971, showed the name Eva Jansen, age 17. Under next of kin, there was a dash. Under reason for relinquishment, it simply said, unable to provide. The space for comments read only, child healthy. Quiet, eyes like his father's. May exhaled shakily. She was almost a child herself, she whispered. Elon turned over the final item, a small envelope, sealed with brittle wax. It had no writing on the front, just a piece of twine once tied around it, now fraying. His hands were steady when he broke the seal. Inside was a single-folded piece of paper. A short note, handwritten in uneven, hesitant script. I can't be your mother now, but I hope the world holds you better than I could. I hope you'll fly, even if I can't watch you. Forgive me if one day you search for me and I'm not there. Love, Eva. There was no flourish, no last name, just Eva. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but inside there was only the rustle of paper and the aching hush of revelation. Elon's throat tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, and his eyes remained fixed on the note. He didn't speak, not at first. He just let the words echo through him, quietly, like ripples expanding through years of unspoken questions. Then, from beside him, came a familiar voice. I think she tried to love you, Isaac said gently. The best way she knew how. Elon turned his gaze slowly toward the boy. Isaac wasn't looking at him, not directly. His face was tilted slightly upward, toward the invisible. But the boy's words landed like truth. Not sharp, not bitter, just human. I think so too, Elon finally said. May had tears on her cheeks, but a softness in her expression. She stood behind her son, placed a hand on his shoulder, then one on Isaac's. The kind of love that gives up is not always less love, she said. Sometimes it's braver. Elon nodded, voice caught in the back of his throat. For so many years, he had carried an unspoken weight, an echo that never quite faded. Now it wasn't gone, but it had changed. The silence surrounding his beginnings no longer felt hollow. It felt like soil, rich, dark, and finally ready for roots. Later that evening, after dinner, Isaac returned to the subject without warning. Do you want to talk to her? He asked. To Eva. Isaac nodded. You could. I mean, even if she's not here. I talk to people that aren't around all the time. Elon smiled faintly. What would I say? Isaac didn't hesitate. You'd say thank you. Elon looked away, out the wide window where dusk had begun to fall across the Texas plains. The horizon burned with orange and purple hues. Somewhere far away, in another continent, a part of him had been left behind in a cradle he never remembered. Now it returned to him in a boy's voice, a letter, a name. He rose from the table and went to his study. When he returned, he held a new envelope, blank, sealed. "What's that?" Isaac asked. "It's my reply," Elon said. "Even if no one reads it, I needed to write it." He didn't explain what the letter said, but inside it, he had written words he had never thought he'd need. "I forgive you. I never stopped wondering, but I no longer feel lost." As the fire in the hearth glowed low and soft shadows filled the room, the three sat together, Elon, May, and Isaac, surrounded by memories that had finally found their voice. Not through confrontation, not even through perfect answers, but through the quiet bravery of those willing to listen. And for the first time, Elon felt his story belonged not only to the stars he'd always chased, but to the soil beneath his feet, where a girl once left a note, and a boy, decades later, finally heard it. A year had passed. A year since Isaac signed his name with shaky hands, and Elon quietly became what he'd never imagined he could be again, a father. The kind of father who listened more than he spoke, who showed up even when no one expected him to, who knew that some of the most powerful things in life couldn't be engineered, they had to be earned. In that year, Casa Aurora had done more than survive. It had bloomed. Thanks to the steady pulse of the EVA Foundation and the quiet strength of May's leadership, the orphanage in Pretoria was no longer an endangered building held together by memory and hope. It had transformed into something extraordinary, a sanctuary made of love, dignity, and structure. New wings had been built. Classrooms with adaptive technology, music studios, green gardens, and spaces where children could simply be children again. Elon visited just once in that year, but what a visit it was. He arrived with Isaac, now a boy with feet firmly planted on both sides of the ocean. No longer only the child of silence, he had become the voice of the project. He wore his favorite navy sweatshirt, fingers trailing gently along the newly painted walls as he walked beside Irene. Though his eyes remained blind to form and color, he smiled as if he could see everything. "There's hope in the air," he whispered. And he was right. Elon had seen hundreds of factories rise, thousands of machines roar to life, but nothing compared to that quiet, almost invisible shift, the one where a child who once had nothing now had a room of their own, a toothbrush with their name on it, and someone to say goodnight. During the reopening ceremony, Elon was expected to give a long speech. Cameras were present. Donors, board members, even old classmates from South Africa who had seen his face a million times but never truly known him. He stepped up to the microphone, paused, then simply said, "Thank you. Thank you to Irene for decades of unwavering service. Thank you to the children who gave the place its soul. Thank you to the walls that remembered him when he couldn't. And finally, thank you to the life that, through twists and silence, had brought him full circle." The crowd stood in hushed applause. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic reveals, just the sound of children laughing in the background. That was enough. But Isaac, true to himself, had prepared something. He stood beside Elon, holding a stack of soft-covered books in his arms. With May's help, he had organized the printing of the stories he and Elon had written over the past year. The title, Hearts of the Aurora. Each story was based on a child they had met, reimagined as heroes of light, adventurers, keepers of dreams. "This book," Isaac said gently to the crowd, "is filled with things we couldn't say out loud. But they're real. They happened, and they matter." Every guest received a copy. Later, back at the guest house, Elon sat in silence. Isaac had fallen asleep, one hand resting on the book, the other still holding Elon's shirt. May brought him tea, sat beside him, as she had when he was still a boy filled with impossible questions and midnight wonderings. "You did good," she said softly. "No, Mom," Elon replied, looking out the window where the stars had begun to shimmer over the South African sky. "We did good. All of us. Even the ones we never got to meet." On the flight back to Texas, Isaac leaned against the window. "Do you think the stars remember us?" he asked. Elon thought about it. Thought about rockets, trajectories, gravity wells, and silence. Then said, "Yes. But more importantly, I think we remember ourselves when we're under them. Back home, their life returned to its rhythm. Morning coffee with May, Isaac's school days in violin practice, evenings writing more stories, this time about children in Bolivia and Nepal, where new dots of light were appearing on the Foundation's map. And yet something inside Elon felt irrevocably different. He no longer lived to reach the farthest edges of a galaxy. Now, he was building galaxies within small lives, each child a universe in need of nurturing. Each voice, a note in a song he had only just begun to hear. One night, sitting by the fireplace, Isaac asked him, "Are we done?" Elon looked puzzled. Done with what? Saving the world. Elon smiled. We've only just started. Because, as he had come to understand, saving the world rarely looks like saving the world. Sometimes it's just showing up, listening to a child, reading a forgotten letter, building something not because it'll make headlines, but because it should exist. And in the quiet of that thought, he looked at Isaac, this boy who once sat alone under a window in a crumbling orphanage, and realized something. It was never about grand gestures. It was always about the small, faithful acts that echo across generations. He reached for Isaac's hand, a father's hand, and felt, not for the first time, that something holy had been returned to him. Dear viewer, has this story stirred something in you? Maybe a memory, a name, or a feeling that's been tucked away for years. I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment below sharing what came to your heart while watching this. I read and respond to each one with care.